Next up is Mina Nemirow. Mina is a product manager at Cigna. She grew up in Montvale, New Jersey, and when she sent that info to me, she said, it's the last exit on the Garden State Parkway. And I was like, that's only New Jersey. Nobody is ever like, I live in West Hartford, it's exit off 43, off of 84. Mina loves hiking with her family and their dog Tuka. Am I saying that right, Mina? Tuka? She also loves reading on the beach, traveling, and eating outside with family and friends in their backyard. Also, Mina is the first Voices of Hope group member who we already knew from Speak Up. She had already told 2 stories at Speak Up, so this is actually her 3rd time telling a story. Mina's dream exodus was very practical. She said, I'm not very picky. Any tropical island where I don't have to cook, my children are entertained, I can do yoga, and there are ample umbrellas on the beach and by the pool, so I can read and not burn. Any island will do. Please welcome Mina Nemirow. You know how to do the mic.
It's a lovely fall Sunday morning about 5 years ago, and my 82-year-old father, Marvin, or Mendel, is telling his survival story to my 12-year-old daughter's Hebrew school class. And I'm sitting at the back of the class listening to stories I've heard many times through the years and thinking about how these kids are really just about the age my father was during the war. And my father starts taking questions, and the teacher asks how many family members he lost. And I thought to myself, I've never asked that question. I think I just took it for granted. My father's a Holocaust survivor, he doesn't have much family. So my father proceeded to answer the question. He said that he and my grandfather and an uncle who had actually been here prior to the war had sat down at one time and counted. And they counted 75 people. 75 people? I had family. I had a big family. I could be one of those people who goes on those family reunions in North Carolina in one of those ginormous houses. I've always wanted to do that. And I could have a closet full of useless bridesmaids' dresses. We could have been a freaking dynasty. So my father grew up in a small log home without electricity or running water. He would actually tell about my grandmother having to break the ice on a basin of water to get her cooking going in the morning. They would use an outhouse, and he would talk about eating endless amounts of potatoes. But they were comfortable. They were fed from their farm, and my grandfather actually traveled as a merchant selling herbal medicinals. And he has very fond memories of his upbringings. He would talk about drinking milk straight from a cow, going cross-country skiing, going to the town mikveh with his father and my uncle, his brother, and feeling really grown up as they would slap their backs with birch to get the blood to rise. He would talk about my grandmother's wonderful Jewish homemade, cooking and baking. And to be honest, under German occupation, he really didn't mind not having to go to school. And to this day, he still loves potatoes. So it's 1943 in their small town of Kurinitz, and my father and grandmother are being awoken by my grandfather early in the morning. So you have to understand, my grandfather and uncle were being used as slave labor by the Germans, and they had left early that morning for work. And my grandfather returned because they were rounding up the Jews. And he's telling them to get into the attic through a secret passageway over the stove that he had built. And he had actually removed the outside entrance to the attic and the ladder that would have brought you there. And my father recalls hearing the Nazis enter their home and hearing them say, "They're not here." And they waited for what I'm sure felt like forever, but how could it have even been enough time? And they went to a Gentile man's home that they knew who had actually worked for my great-grandfather. So he hid them in a potato bunker for the day, which is a shallow pit lined with hay and with hay over it. And they and brought them food during the day. And when night fell, told them that they couldn't return to their home and that they needed to flee. And my father recalls seeing fires, and they went into the woods of Belarus that night with nothing but the clothes on their back. So, and I neglected to say that my father is the youngest of 4 children. At this point, they had already lost his 2 sisters, Sarah, who had died prior to the war, and then my namesake, Mina, who had been rounded up by the Nazis in a neighboring town and shot by the Germans where she had been working there. So the entire population, the Jewish population of Kernitz, was executed that day, except for those who escaped. And they later learned that my uncle and a cousin had paired up, and they had traveled for some time together, but they too eventually perished. So my father told us many stories about being in the woods. He would talk about actually getting drunk on moonshine at the age of 12 or 13 and having to learn what mushrooms they could eat. And he would talk about about having to stay warm, near the fire and having to take turns sleeping near the fire. Them smoking themselves out of their first makeshift shelter because they didn't know how to properly build a chimney. My grandfather actually officiated a marriage in the woods, and he and my grandparents and others that they were with surviving typhus without any medications. And honestly, told from a young boy's eyes to his children, it really sounded like a great adventure. But as I got older, I think the gravity of it came through more in what my father had to say. And I remember one time with bitterness him saying to me, "Do you know what it means to shit in one's pants?" Well, it's not just a saying. And proceeded to tell me about running through the woods with bullets whizzing past them and having to spend the day in a swamp to return to their campsite completely destroyed and so many people lost. So here I am, sitting in this classroom, and 75 people is just reverberating through my head. So my parents, they leave, they go home to New Jersey, and I go about my Sunday afternoon, and I just can't stop thinking about it. I can't stop thinking I had family. And I pull into my driveway after doing my errands and realizing that my father would be home at that point. I called him, and I said, "Dad, I just can't stop thinking about it." And his response to me was, "I think about it all the time. I think about it at every celebration, at every Simcha celebration. I think about that I don't have those times to share with my children, with my siblings, with my brother and sister, and I don't have nieces and nephews to celebrate. My father lost being an uncle, really being a brother and being a cousin, but he did not lose being the most wonderful, giving, loving father to my brother Ivan and I. My father would come to me early in the morning and would check on me before he would leave to work. And I remember one time him waking me and bringing me to the bathroom to clean me up because I had vomited in my sleep. And I insisted that my dolly had to be cleaned first, and he did it to pacify me. Or I remember when he came crossing the school lawn to shove a winter coat through the classroom window because the temperature had dropped that day. Or at the time he came home with daisy razors without my mother knowing, he taught me how to shave my legs safely, because he realized I'd been sneaking it after cutting his own face with his razor. So the Nazis took away from us our family, and but they did not take away my father's upbringing. They did not take away his family values. They did not take away what he had learned was to have unconditional love for one's children. They did not take my father's soul. Thank you.
Great, Mina. Terrific, Mina. Thank you so much.